Each week on CoinWatch, Puey, the CEO of Edge Wallet, and I dive into a different coin, explain how it works, talk about its history, its pros, its cons, and today we look at EOS.
Do you want to just start us off by giving us a brief overview of what it is?
So not going into the details of the ICO and whatnot, EOS is a smart contract blockchain that really tries to take a new model, present a new model for consensus, and also resources. How you pay for fees is drastically different in EOS than any blockchain prior to it. It was discovered, or at least white paper for EOS was published in 2017, right in the midst of the big ICO boom. It is by the founder of BitShares and Steam, Dan Larimer, and a lot of the architecture does borrow from a lot of those previous blockchains, but it is probably the highest profile project he's worked on, since he had started in the crypto Bitcoin blockchain space, and definitely one to keep an eye on for sure.
I actually did an interview with Dan Larimer this week, and so if you guys want to check that out, that's on my members channel, and I'll post a link in the video description. But it was super interesting to chat with him just about the history of all of this, right back to BitShares days and through Steam and all of this, because as you said, this kind of has been an iterative process for him. He's done multiple projects and then learned things along the way, and EOS is sort of his idea of improving upon past mistakes, things that they've learned, things that they've made better. Let's dive into the tokenomics. Tell me about like supply cap, all of that.
Got it. So EOS was an ICO in 2017, one of the biggest ICOs and the longest ICOs we had ever heard of. So they had launched and issued 200 million tokens over the course of 5 days. Big ICO, raised $172 million. It was backed by a lot of major VCs, including Brock Pierce. And then for the next 350 days, they issued 700 million tokens for an aggregate of $4 billion in total. Now that starts to come in an average of over $5 a token. And admittedly, for people that had bought into the kind of second phase of the ICO, they're looking at kind of negative returns right now, because EOS is selling in the $2 to $3 range, about $2.52 last I checked. I think it's up a little bit because of that major announcement that you'd covered with Dan Larimer with Google Cloud now wanting to become a block producer. So unless a lot of those ICO participants had sold early, they're actually unfortunately in the red. The maximum supply of EOS and their tokenomics is about 1 billion tokens, although it does have infinite inflation, a small amount, initially 5% per year, and that got voted on by the block producers to be reduced down to 1%. And that 1% is simply split across what we haven't talked about yet, but the block producers in the network. These are the equivalent of the miners that are the ones that verify transactions, protect the network, and determine consensus. So quite a lot of tokens, 1 billion. Biggest ICO we'd seen in pretty much the history of crypto. A lot of money raised and a lot held. And when I say raised, this was raised by the company, the for-profit company, Block.One, of which Dan Larimer is the CTO.
You mentioned block producers, so let's dive into the difference between proof of work, proof of stake, and delegated proof of stake, which is what EOS is, which is a different model again.
Exactly. So let's take our step back into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is a proof of work blockchain. Anybody can participate in proof of work by simply buying hardware and equipment, running the software that mines Bitcoin. And consensus and proof of work does two things. As a reminder, it creates new coins, as well it secures the network by saying what transactions are valid. In the case of proof of stake, instead of you exerting energy, basically electrical energy, to mine a cryptocurrency, instead you're staking money. You're staking currency in the native currency of that blockchain. You're saying, I'm going to take this and I'm going to lock it up. And if I confirm a transaction that is invalid, and everyone else says that, hey, red flag, Paul confirmed a transaction is invalid, or my specific network computer, then I will lose that money that I staked. So it's in a way very similar, proof of stake compared to proof of work. You are putting energy at risk in proof of work, which is money, energy is money. In proof of stake, you're putting in cryptocurrency at risk. The difference now with EOS is it's a delegated proof of stake, meaning that there are people that have currency and they delegate the choice to someone else, to another entity, much like delegates in the political system. I don't vote, I delegate someone else to vote on whether or not a bill should be passed. In a way, that's kind of how our system works. It's how our brain thinks. We don't want to make all the decisions ourselves. So with EOS and similar blockchains before it, people with the tokens, such as EOS, would actually vote for a block producer. They would delegate, and that block producer would be the one that votes on which transactions are valid. That's the aspect of delegation where the D of DPoS, or delegated proof of stake, comes from. Anyone that holds EOS can stake it. With that stake, they vote. And with that vote is a chosen number of block producers, whoever the 21 largest block producers that receive the 21 largest votes then become the decision makers on the consensus of the network.
And so, as you mentioned, Google Cloud is now opting to
Yeah.
become one of those 21 block producers. And it's interesting because they say like, well, they're becoming a block producer now, but they still have to go through all the process of having people vote for them. So yes, they
Exactly.
are, they've set up a process that Google made an announcement yesterday, and they said, yes, we are becoming a block producer for EOS. We think this is going to be great because, you know, combining our energies is a mutually symbiotic relationship. And so that's exciting to see. That kind of made me perk my ears up. And now they have to go through the process of actually getting the community to vote for them if they want them to be a part of the network. So what do you think about claims that having these 21 delegates is overly centralizing the system? Because that seems to be a very contentious issue. It's the key element that really differentiates EOS from a lot of other systems. And it's the key element that a lot of people have a lot of issue with as well.
So 21, it doesn't sound like a whole lot given a world with 6 billion people. But one has to remember that even though you have 21 block producers, you have pretty much all token holders able to decide on who those 21 block producers are. Now, if someone doesn't like a block producer, you have the vote to simply say, no, I don't like them, vote for someone else. However, let's kind of be a little bit real. In a way, that's similar to our political system. In theory, I do have a vote to say I want to create another political party. But how hard is it to actually get another political party in office? It can be incredibly hard, especially in the context of a large capital state like the US and, you know, the presidential election. So in the same sense, the largest parties that even have the capacity and the resources to let people know they exist. Like I could be a block producer today and I could do all the things that people want me to do, but how do I even just market myself as an entity that people could vote on is a big challenge. And so one of the criticisms of the block producer system is the fact that it brings in very traditional politics into the equation. And because there are no rules under what you can and can't do, one of the things that many people don't realize about block producers is that many of them actually buy votes, which in theory is something you're not supposed to do in regular politics. You know, there's laws against that, but block producers actually give a lot of their reward back to the people that vote for them. And for some people, they might say, well, that seems like a conflict of interest. But for others, they say, but it's a free world. It's a free market. I do with my money as I choose. But that definitely does conflict with a lot of traditional thought about the way we choose and we vote and the way we delegate and how politics works in the current world.
Well, it is kind of similar to how politics works in the current world,
because
a lot of people get voted in when they're like, we're going to give you free ponies and everyone gets a free toothbrush and you know. There is one side issue that I will say about the vote buying, or the kickbacks as they call it. You know, they say token holders, if you vote for me, then you'll get kickbacks, you'll get a percentage of the block reward that we have. I would say that's further aligning incentives in a way. Like I understand that it makes people very uncomfortable when you start phrasing it in terms of, you know, vote buying votes. But also you have to realize that currently, what incentive is there for a voter to actually go out of their way and cast a vote? The same within the real world right now. What incentive is there? You have to really hate the person who's in power or really like a person that you want in power to actually get you out of your house to a voting station. I mean, the same thing goes when you're dealing with one of these networks. What is the impetus to actually get people to use the energy to vote? And so some people are saying, well, if we incentivize them, maybe they'll come out and vote if we give them some kickbacks. And so it then becomes this competitive environment where, well, the person who's offering me the best return on my time and energy is going to get my vote, which is kind of interesting.
Yep. And actually what I really like about it, even though I pointed out this is a criticism, what I like about it is it's fully transparent.
Right.
And very, very different from normal politics where you don't really know what's going on under the table as far as what a politician has agreed to a large corporation if they get put into office. So to me, transparency actually removes a lot of the concern, but it is something that people should be aware of. They're like, okay, yep, they are buying votes, but everybody's buying votes and you kind of know where the money's going to after the vote's bought. So that I think is something to know. It's a bit of a criticism, but in the end, I actually don't really care. because it is transparent. Everyone can do it, and there's nothing wrong with it.
I have a question for you about this and this whole idea of being centralized versus decentralized. I mean, some people draw the analogy that this isn't dissimilar to the way Bitcoin is mined, because you have very few pools and a lot of power is located and centralized in these very few pools, which is actually, it ends up being less than 21 pools that the majority of mining power is distributed amongst. So would you say that that is like a reasonable analogy for people to be making?
It is a reasonable analogy. And I remember, I think it was actually Dan Larimer himself that had tweeted saying, oh, you don't think 21 block producers is decentralized enough? Well, what about the 5 major mining pools in Bitcoin? And so that is a very fair analogy in comparison. And personally, to me, decentralized is, I hate the word in many ways because it's so ill-defined. Like, when is it decentralized? When is it not? And I start to really ask myself, it's a total spectrum. And more importantly than that does it have enough of an architecture such that it achieves the end goal? And if the end goal of decentralization is that you can't be shut down, then to me, one of the more important things isn't how many, but how distributed they are. Do you have 1,000 block producers that are all in my room, in my living room right now? Or do you have 50 that are in 50 completely different countries? Or 21 that are in 21 different countries that all hate each other, right? Which that to me is actually more important, is that you distribute the control across multiple different entities that in a way don't agree. And that's how you get more of decentralization. When everyone kind of agrees, then they can kind of agree with each other to compromise the network. So that's where decentralization is really, really poorly defined by just simply saying a number, but really where are those entities? And I remember actually I think in your interview with Dan, he mentioned that, hey, this helps break apart the impression of EOS being controlled by the Chinese. And maybe that was the issue, is that a lot of the block producers were in China. Now you have a major block producer that isn't in China. And actually that definitely does help. There is, I think, a concern that immediately came across my plate. He had mentioned, well, maybe if Google does it, then a lot of other major players do it as well. But do we want 21 major large corporations actually being the block producers for a major blockchain?
That's
and a lot of the
question.
Corporations are big targets for government.
That's sort of what happened with the Libra, right? I mean, on the one hand, I like the idea of all these corporations, being in charge and it not being centrable and all that in theory. But at the end of the day, the US government can put pressure on Google. It can put pressure on Uber and Spotify and all these other people who are meant to be involved. So I have a similar question about this, because you said that the main point of all of this is whether this can be shut down, whether these people can be co-opted, whether they can collude. All of this is important to look at. So let's dive into the history of EOS a little bit, because actually it started off with a bang. It started off with a kind of collusion in a way. The 21 block producers got together and said, okay, there was this hack during the ICO, we're voting to freeze certain amounts of money, we're voting to freeze certain accounts, and they did. And that immediately made people very wary of it, because they were like, if these 21 block producers can do this, like, what is the future of this system? So what are your thoughts on all that?
So they do have that easy to freeze account feature inside of EOS, where it's not like a hard fork, it's not a major change, it's just, yes, we all vote and suddenly we can freeze an account. And that definitely is a concern. To me, I feel like that is something that should be a heavier weight operation versus just simply 21 block producers agreeing. But in essence, though, that's it. Once you have all 21 block producers agreeing, they can do absolutely anything to the network. So part of me says like, oh, that shouldn't be so easy. But at the same time, well, really, once you have 21 entities agreeing, then all bets are off. Now, one thing is valid, though, is because this is a proof of stake blockchain. This is where I give proof of stake some credit, is that there is money being staked on the network to determine the consensus model. Now, if I don't like that, and I think that someone blocking accounts is going to reduce the value of EOS, then I won't want that block producer on the network. Like, I will unstake from that block producer and stake and vote on a different block producer, because it affects the value of the tokens that I've staked and that I'm holding and that I'm likely a hodler of. That doesn't actually exist in proof of work. People forget that. In proof of work, you don't actually have to give a damn about the currency that you're mining. All you have to give a damn about is the hardware you bought. And you bought that almost certainly with dollars, yen, euro, pesos, whatever. You bought it with something other than the cryptocurrency. Hence the reason why there's miners that switch between all the different cryptocurrencies to whichever one is most profitable at that second that they're mining. Because they don't give a damn. They just sell it for something else.
You can't vote out the miners.
You can't vote out the miners. So you can't vote out the miners. They don't care. They don't necessarily care about the currency itself because they can just quickly sell it as soon as they get it. Well, 50 blocks in the case of Bitcoin, they care 50 or 100 blocks worth. So as soon as they mine it, they have to hold it for 100 blocks. But that's 100 blocks, 10-minute blocks, 1,000 minutes. But other than 1,000 minutes, they don't actually have to care about the crypto. Whereas in the case of proof of stake, they're having to stake a significant amount that they can't use and could lose the value of if the chain goes in a direction that reduces the value. So I think the incentives are still relatively aligned. And people didn't outvote the block producers, so people probably felt like that was a good enough decision to freeze those accounts. If that lowers the value of the coin, then so be it. But people had a choice and they didn't choose otherwise.
This is a very interesting feature of delegated proof of stake. I like the idea that people do have more choice about who they want involved in their system. It's almost like freedom of association, right? So I think when people talk about Google getting involved, some people are up in arms about it, saying this is awful. Why do we want this company that's known to just violate people's trust with data breaches, all of this stuff, collusion with government, all of that? Why do we want them involved? And at the end of the day, you can say, okay, you probably don't want them involved. Don't vote for them,
Exactly.
But what if Google comes in and actually takes power away from a lot of the Chinese stakers right now? Perhaps you see that as a good thing. What if, 5 Silicon Valley tech companies come in and take the top 21 block producer spots? Then you might start to say, okay, I like it being decentralized somewhat with these people coming in, but this is too much. This is maybe the US government getting involved a little too much. So people do have this choice, which I think gives a lot of flexibility to the network.
Yeah, they have the choice. The hard part is they have now the responsibility of doing the due diligence on who to vote for. And like you said, why should people go to the voting polls and vote? It actually requires a lot of work. And so hopefully, just like you said, now they have a bit of an incentive in that, that person actually gives you a kickback of some of the mining or, delegated proof of stake rewards that they earn.
And actually, there's something interesting. You mentioned the vote from 5% to 1% of the inflation. And so they're actually going back to 5%. And with that other 4%, that's now being distributed. I'm not sure whether it's been launched yet or whether it will be launched, but Dan was explaining how this is going to be trying to incentivize people to develop in the community. That's what the original 4% was. They burnt a bunch of money, like you mentioned, because they basically put 4% of inflation into a pool and said, this is for development funds. They couldn't figure out how to distribute it in a fair way. They didn't have a mechanism.
Always the hard part, who gets it?
Yeah. And so they decided, okay, this is unnecessarily inflating the currency. Let's just burn it. And so they did. And everyone's like, oh gosh, okay. They burnt it. They really just burnt that. And so then now they're actually figuring out a mechanism whereby that money can be transferred, and they're going to create pools where people can hold their money for a year or 10 years, and there'll be different buckets, and people will get like different interest rates according to which bucket they want to stake their EOS in, which is very interesting and also tends to align people a bit more. It aligns incentives because it rewards people for thinking long-term about the coin and sort of staking for a longer period of time. It encourages people who are more interested in the survival of the network to get involved, and they get rewarded for that. So that's a very interesting development as well.
Yep, absolutely. And that combined with the model that they've chosen for how transactions are confirmed at what cost for what resources, contributes to a pretty unique offering of the chain. Although it's still what I consider to be a very experimental take on solving these problems, both consensus and the fee model. And whether or not it works long-term is yet to be seen. It's definitely run into a few problems in the past. Oops, sorry about that train going by. That'll get edited out.
Maybe.
Anyway, so whether or not it works long-term still has yet to be seen, but it definitely has shown definitely some issues over the past that have needed to be looked at, and block producers had to propose solutions to the resource model and fee model. But I'm happy to have seen at least a unique take. Unique take in that. We can go into a little bit more detail on how that works in EOS to prepare people if they actually try to get into the EOS ecosystem.
Yeah. So one thing that I'll say right off the bat is I really dislike how you get involved. It's really difficult. If I go to my Edge wallet right now and I go to create an EOS account because I'm like, someone wants to send me some EOS, cool, I'll create a wallet, which is how you do this in the crypto world. It's going to tell me you don't have enough funds to create this wallet. Immediately, that's a weird catch-22, where it's how do I receive the EOS? to be able to pay for the wallet if I don't have a wallet into which I can receive the EOS.
Bitcoin and many other currencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Monero, when you create an account or a wallet, it's just a random number and the blockchain knows nothing about it, right? It knows absolutely nothing about it. And someone can send to that wallet some money, the same as if they sent it to a wallet or an address that has already received money and is already seen on the blockchain. It's absolutely identical. The difference in EOS is you have to create not just a public and private key, but you then have to create a name, a specific 12-character name, can be shorter, but you pay more, 12-character name, and that's paid for by another account. And that account then has to stake resources so that it can then send money. At minimum, send money or interact with a smart contract. And this is exactly what you're talking about as far as it is very difficult. It's not just very difficult, it's just alienating. The fact that I have to pay money to start. And a lot of people didn't know that this was happening even in prior Dan Larimer blockchains. So Steam Steam and now Hive have the exact same architecture. The difference is there was a for-profit company that had a very big incentive to get people on board onto the chain and get mass adoption. And so therefore they were basically paying for people's account in exchange for KYC. So if anyone out there did use Steam in the early days, you probably gave steemit.com your email address. They verified it. They might have also waited an additional day or two to make sure that you didn't try to register a bunch of different accounts, and then they would activate an account, and they actually paid the Steem necessary to activate it. Now they had a whole bunch of Steem, so they're like, sure, we'll just go ahead and pay a few Steem here to activate the account. And so it felt more, I guess, user-friendly and familiar. With EOS, no one's paying your EOS. Ironically, Block.One, which has a bunch of EOS, a ton of EOS, including $4 billion worth from an ICO, isn't paying anyone's EOS to activate accounts.
But Voice.inc is. So Voice, which is a platform, a new social network that's being launched on EOS.io. Maybe we'll explain the difference between EOS.io and EOS because it's that gets confusing as well. Yeah. But basically, Voice.inc is a subsidiary of Block.One. And so they're actually paying for people to set up accounts. So they cover that cost for you when you set up on Voice.
And Voice, being a social media network, correct me if I'm wrong, is doing something similar to what Hive, or at least Steam It did back when it was launched. But you're right, it is definitely much more challenging having to pay for the activation of an account. That's only where the challenging starts. Once you start actually transacting EOS and realizing the resources required, now you get into a whole different rabbit hole.
So get into that rabbit hole. Let's do it.
Oh my. All right, here we go. And so taking Bitcoin as example, well, every time you send a transaction, you have to pay for the resource of that transaction. And Bitcoin measures that in the size of the transaction in bytes, like data bytes, regardless of how much processing power it takes to send that money. It's just the number of bytes of the transaction. EOS breaks up the cost into the different types of computing resources necessary to do a transaction into 3 types. One is CPU, which is like math computation that a computer would do, just like CPU on your computer. When you go buy, the next laptop, you notice you pay for faster CPU. That's one of the resources, as well as network bandwidth, which is the bandwidth to send data across the network. And the third is storage. And this is more for permanent data. You buy it, you don't really kind of rent it. So those are the 3 main resources on EOS. And every time you send a transaction, you use some number of, usually the first 2, RAM and CPU, and network bandwidth and CPU, and sometimes RAM. RAM, obviously, if you create a new account, that's something that's permanently on the blockchain, you're gonna have to spend some RAM. And the way the resources work on EOS, at least early on, this has changed recently. Watch a great video between you and Ash describing the new Rex network. But prior with EOS, you took some EOS and you staked it. This is as an end user. You staked it and you specified how much EOS to stake as network, how much to stake as CPU, and then how much RAM you wanted to buy. And as you make transactions, it burns through those 3 resources. 2 of them recharge every 24 hours, but RAM, you just deplete it and you have to rebuy it. And as it depletes, you have to then either stake more or wait some period of time. And that makes it feel like you have invisible free fees. Like you want to send someone 3 EOS, all you see in your wallet is you had 6 EOS, you sent 3, now you have 3 remaining. And it felt great. You're like, wow, this is amazing, until you run out. And suddenly you send too many transactions in a day, and suddenly, sorry, you don't have enough resources, you need RAM. Like, where do I what's this RAM thing? You know, all I did is I activated an EOS account. You know, it cost me an EOS, one EOS. What do I do with this RAM? Well, you got to, you know, get some. Okay, I get some.
How?
Someone sends me some. So even say you get a friend to just send you some EOS. Great, I have EOS. Well, now you need to stake it. Guess what? Staking costs you CPU. Well, what if you are out of CPU? So I'm out of CPU, so therefore I can't actually stake. It's almost like it's the equivalent of being so hungry, you have no energy to eat.
I know, and that's the worst. Or when you're so tired and you can't go to bed, so you just lie there for another hour on the couch because you're like, I'm too tired to brush my teeth.
I'm too tired. I'm too tired to brush my teeth. I'm too hungry and exhausted to put the fork in my mouth. And this has happened to many EOS users. They're out of CPU, so they can't actually stake to get any more CPU. So what do you have to do? You have to go to someone else and say, can you please put the fork in my mouth for me? Which is the equivalent of them staking their own CPU for you so that you could stake the EOS that you have. You could have a ton of EOS, but you then have to stake more of it in order to be able to do transactions again. And so this is the part where EOS takes the model, the kind of extreme model compared to Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you're always paying fees. Yuck. Right. Like I'm always paying fees. EOS, you kind of pay it once, you get it for free, but then it really sucks as soon as you exceed that limit. Then you're like, oh, this is terrible. It's like great until it's terrible.
It's experimental and trying out all these different things that really does show you the trade-offs of different systems. Because on the one hand, I am not going to pay $3 to buy a juice using Bitcoin. It's just not something I'm going to do in my everyday life. But I might use EOS because it's basically free for me to do that. And
will you
that's
pay
why you get
$1 a month to use EOS. But then you get pretty much as many transactions as you need.
Especially comparing it with Ethereum right now. EOS can do a lot of the things that Ethereum does. You could see a DeFi network starting to grow there. Obviously, Ethereum had like a 3-year head start, but you are starting to see that grow. A lot of kind of gambling sites on EOS at the moment. Gaming's pretty heavy there, but it is, you're not going to get the gas fees that you do on Ethereum. And then on the other side of things, you've got the things that you're talking about, where it just starts to get weird and a little bit difficult. So like at the end of the day, you know, when you look at these different trade-offs, where do you end up?
I definitely didn't like the trade-off of having to stake for the 3 different resources. Part of me just wanted to say, hey, if you're gonna make me stake, just make me stake and just call it a resource thing. And then just, you know, don't make me choose like CPU, how much do I do RAM, CPU net and all that junk. Now, however, I'll give EOS the credit, you know, with the advent of the Rex network in middle of 2019, around May of 2019, that definitely reduced the cost of the fees that people needed to stake. And building out a lending network, basically an exchange where a lot of people that just had EOS and were just staking it for security purposes, we didn't cover that, but you could stake it to prevent it from getting stolen. We're staking it, could then also lend out the resources that EOS was staking out to other people in a very seamless way. And so that definitely simplifies the model. It makes it where a very small amount of money can buy you so much resources that you're not likely to hit that case where, you know, you're hungry, yet you can't feed yourself. That becomes very, very, very rare. And so that I think does make it much, much more promising. And there's a future update to the EOS chain, and this is a bit nuanced, but it makes it where if people, there's a total amount of resources available in the entire network as a whole. And the amount that you have access to is dependent on everyone that staked their EOS. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of EOS in the network that is locked up by Block.One, as an example, because they have a whole bunch that vests over time. That actually has some of the resource of the network, but no one can use it. Nobody can use it. So if there's a bunch of people that don't stake their EOS, that's a certain percentage of the network of resources that cannot be used by anybody. So they're actually proposing a change to the EOS network where even the resources that aren't staked are usable. All 100% are usable. And the people that stake are the ones that get the credit and are able to use it, but it's out of the entire pool. So it's a bit of a nuanced change, but a very big one to make transactions even cheaper and really capitalize on the resource pool, making for significantly cheaper staking, invisible free transactions over a longer period of time. And so that I think does give it promise, which is why, you know, I'm a bit more bullish on EOS now than I was before.
Now that we've introduced the idea of Rex, talk about some of the benefits of this.
Yeah, so the great thing about Rex is not just the fact that people can use the EOS blockchain for very minimal of resource, like really small amount of EOS that they'll have to pay to someone else to borrow the staked EOS that they have and use it for sending and receiving transactions. But now for the first time, end users, not block producers, but end users can stake EOS and actually earn money on that. Because before, the only purpose of staking EOS, there are only two reasons to stake EOS as an end user. It was to vote on a block producer. And number two was to secure your funds, because it took several days, 4 days to unstake. So it was a slower process to unstake before someone could spend it. So if the key was compromised and someone wanted to spend it, it would still require 4 days for them to unstake the EOS. So there's security and voting. Now there's a third reason. If you're just simply a hodler of EOS, you're not making a lot of transactions, you could take your stash, stake it all, and then it becomes lent out to the community as resources for people to use a CPU and network. And they're paying you to borrow those resources in a fully non-custodial way. You're not actually giving that to them. They cannot take your EOS away. It's fully on-chain, and you're just letting them use the resources that EOS is entitled to by simply staking. So that's one great thing as well about the advent of Rex, is now people have a financial reason to stake. Whereas before it's like you said, why should I vote? I don't have a reason to stake, just voting, but who cares about voting? Now there's a good financial reason for it.
And especially when you are dealing with inflation, I think it's important to find a way to balance that, because if you are inflating the money supply, you don't want people's savings to just disappear. You want to be able to give them back something in return. So if they are able to earn that back through interest, I think that's really important. And we're seeing that in a lot of projects in crypto at the moment. Now we come to the final moment where you make your ultimate decision. Paul, is this a coin that you're going to be willing to put $100 into?
At this point in time, yes, actually. And I think that's because it seems to have lost a little bit of its excitement from being like one of the top 10 currencies. Its price is below, from what I calculate. Hopefully, if I'm wrong, someone please comment in the video. But they're below the kind of ICO price that many people have bought in at, which gives it a lot of upside potential, in my view, especially given, the hot news on Google, whether you like it or not, that definitely is going to give it a lot more visibility. I presume that Google Cloud is going to want to promote it from the viewpoint of, that is now resources that come to them. That's revenue that comes to them if they do succeed in becoming one of the main block producers. The 21 or even the standby block producers up to 68 are also compensated.
Right.
So they'll want people using the network, and they'll want to be compensated, and they'll want that token to have value. So given the latest news, the introduction of Rex make me more bullish on it than I was a year ago. I was definitely very like, oh, this is a tough chain to use. I'm not sure I like it.
I am going to give similar reasons, but also cite Dan Larimer himself. After chatting with him in depth, in the interview, we dive into the philosophy of democracy. We talk about Rothbard. We talk about all of these things. And I like to look at a team behind a project. I like to look at whether my values are aligned. I also think that, the Google News is pretty bullish for me. I would like to see it get a lot easier to use. I want to see the getting started get easier. I want to see DeFi really start to take a hold. Ethereum honestly has a huge first mover advantage, and that's going to be a lot for people to overcome. That 3-year head start just gives them so much more advantage, because you've got such a network effect. There is so much interoperability in this world that Ethereum has created. So, whether EOS will get there, I don't know, but I will bet $100 on it. And we'll see what happens.
We're going to disagree one day.
One day we'll do. Well, Paul, this has been wonderful. I've learned a whole lot. I always learn a whole lot chatting with you. And I also learned a whole lot just diving into EOS this week.
Same here.
EOS is very interesting. I really find the delegated proof of stake model interesting. I don't know whether it's eventually going to work. I mean, we're going to have to see all of this experimentation, but I definitely like where it's headed. And I think that it's very interesting to watch play out. But thank you so much for your time and expertise. It's always wonderful having you on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to watch my 1-hour deep dive with CTO of Block.One Dan Larimer, sign up to become a member at naomibrockwell.com/memberships, or head over to my podcast. All podcast links can be found at cointree.app/naomibrockwell. Thank you so much for watching.
Cut.